Okay, so welcome to our facilitation training session. So this session is very much focused on facilitation. So first we need to cover off and be clear what that is. There's lots of content included in these slides, and I understand that for some on the call, it will take a little time to digest all of the information. But the reason that all the information is there on the slides is I'll share these afterwards, so you can go through and take in the information in your own time. I'll also be able to share the recording so that you can watch back and see any elements of it again if you want to. So our first question, and please do pop comments in the chat, pop your hand up, or just unmute, and let's make this a conversation rather than just me talking for the whole time. What do people think that facilitation is? And to answer that question, it might help you to think, what's the difference between training and facilitation? Any contributions?
I'd say facilitating is about sort of encouraging other people to complete a task or do something. So you're guiding them rather than telling them how to do it.
Yeah, very much so. So you're guiding the process, hopefully not getting actually too involved. You are just facilitating. It's hard to describe it without using the same word, but you're bringing a group of people together to, as Nayara said, guide the process. Any other ways of putting that? Because different ways of describing it help people to understand.
Yes, if I may.
Yeah.
So first, according to me, it's like providing a platform so that people can join in and bring about the discussion or the problem or whatever the issue is. So instead of going for a formal training, it's like a platform for everybody to join in.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, because you're creating, as you said, you're creating that platform, you're making that space. And as you also said, it's for people to almost bring to the conversation what they want to. So it really is that the content should be led by the participants of the workshop that you're leading. Anything else? So yes.
Hi, Hannah.
Hello.
I think facilitation is about creating interactive opportunities for discussions that would lead to solutions and learning. So it's more about collaboration. Yeah,
it's definitely about collaboration. And yeah, it's nice what you said there about creating those opportunities for participation, because a key thing of a facilitator is being aware of the workshop participants, who is speaking a lot, who's not speaking at all, and making sure that you're being very reactive and guiding the situation so that there is that full participation. And so why would you facilitate? Why is it worth having those situations? I'm just going to bring open the chat. So I've also had supporting conversations to help create a plan or solve a problem, and bringing 2 or more people to the same idea of results. So that's an interesting point, because it is one of your objectives that you get this mutual agreement to what's decided. And that's the difficult part of facilitation, because you might well have very differing opinions and ideas that are coming together, and actually getting to the point where those ideas do come together and people do agree. That's where you can face challenges in facilitation. So tell me from your actual experience in the field, what situations do you have where you think you would facilitate?
On our side, we do lots of workshops with ILET users, because there are lots of human impacts, several stakeholders involved, government and local people and everything. So we do several workshops. Some of them are just like one stakeholder. Some of them are multiple stakeholders together. And so, yeah, so we do a lot of facilitation, because we want them to speak and to be able to brainstorm and give us the you know, these are the issues and, you know, what they think could be done to resolve it. We know what can be done, but we want them to be able to think about it. It's a resources that's supporting their living. It's our natural heritage, and, you know, make them aware how important it is. And, you know, there's little things. So a lot of our job at the Mauritian Wildlife, especially for the ILS education side, we do a lot of workshops and facilitation, not just in a workshop setting, but also when we're doing visits with them on the field and discussions that are ongoing. And there's a lot of sensitivity sometimes, and we have to manage people with different views, some have strong opinions, and yeah.
So you said what I thought was a really interesting point there, in that you know what should be done. So why are you going and saying, what do you think can be done, rather than going and telling or training?
I think it's important. People, you know, sometimes people do things because they don't know or they're not paying attention. So once they're aware of what's an issue, what's a conservation issue, and you know, they can easily come up with solutions, and the same solution that we have in idea, they say it themselves, and which is great, because then they have more ownership, because they are suggesting these ideas which we are taking to authorities and having them come together and discuss. So it's important for them to realize and for them to be able to give their ideas and contribute. So this sense of ownership, I think it's really important, instead of us coming and saying, you know, this is what should be done.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's about buy-in, and like you say, about ownership. And if you support people to realize solutions that they think work for them, then that's really powerful. Holly or Mike?
Hi. I was just thinking that training's more about, you know, you build that capacity by teaching, whereas, or in a form of that, whereas when lights gone out, whereas facilitation is a lot more like enabling the conversation, enabling them to create those ideas and create that kind of that plan.
Definitely. So yeah, you are building the capacity in a different way, because you're actually building thinking skills, problem solving skills, and actually a well facilitated workshop can help those workshop participants in the future to be able to use the tools that you use during the session themselves for future decision making or problem solving. So just need to minimize things here. So just going through some of the things which you very much reflects what you said. So facilitation is about getting groups of people together to solve problems effectively, make decisions, and develop plans. You won't necessarily do all of those things in one facilitated session. You might just be doing one of those, but those are really the key three things that you would be doing through a facilitated session. A facilitator often helps a group of people to understand their common objectives and assist them to plan how to achieve these objectives. In doing so, the facilitator remains neutral, meaning they do not take a particular position in the discussion. So this can be a challenging part for us, because often we're in the situation where we don't have the opportunity or the finances to bring in an external facilitator to run that workshop. So you might well be facilitating a workshop for the local communities alongside, you know, for the conservation organization that you're working for. So you're not neutral. You do want an end result, which is, you know, related to the best outcome for the conservation issue that you're trying to address. So one thing that's important, if you are in the situation where you do care what the end result is, to be very conscious of that and to keep yourself in check in terms of the facilitator should remain neutral and guiding the process, supporting the participants to come to the end result that is right for them. So a facilitator is also someone who helps to bring about an outcome, such as learning, productivity, and communication. So you're making those things happen during the session that you're running. And they do that by providing indirect, unobtrusive assistance, guidance, or supervision. So planning the process and where necessary, breaking into groups or moving into a different thinking or planning tool so that the conversation can evolve and you can get to the end result that you're going for. Oops. So we mentioned it again in our previous discussion, but one thing that's really important is that encouraging full participation. So you need to be aware of the group that you have there. And this is also important when you're thinking who should be invited to attend the workshop, because there can be different sensitivities with bringing together audiences where, for instance, in some cultures or communities, people from the villages may not want to speak in front of people from the government. So therefore, it might not be relevant to have those participants together in the same workshop, even if they're both stakeholders in the same issue. You might need to work with those stakeholders separately and then bring the thinking together, have feedback sessions. So you need to think of the dynamic of the participants that are invited to enable full participation, to make sure people are comfortable. And that might also mean thinking about other considerations like people being able to travel there, people having the right levels of comfort, and making sure people's needs are met in the first instance. It's also an important role to promote mutual understanding. So you might well have a point in the session where there are differing opinions of ideas or the ways that things should move forwards. So supporting the participants to understand each other's viewpoints, and we'll go through some tools for that later, to guide the situation so that you don't end up with these differing viewpoints arguing, but you support them to collaborate instead, because they can find a mutual idea that works for both of them. Also fostering inclusive decisions. So you want your workshop participants to agree on the end result, because as we've said, that gets the buy-in and the ownership. And in order to do this, you'll want to understand and demonstrate thinking tools and interpersonal skills. So some of those thinking tools is what we'll be going through today. And by using these things, so by applying a combination of thinking tools and interpersonal skills, the facilitator will help groups to work more effectively together, and at the same time help them to learn how to work together more effectively. So that could potentially improve their future performance. So they learn the skills of problem solving and decision making through the process that you take them through. So we mentioned that there's 3 key things that you might be doing through a facilitated session. So it's either solving a problem, making a decision, or developing plans. And the process that the facilitator has a role in is sort of step by step through that, starting with designing the group work process. So you want to, in terms of these divergent and convergent phases, we'll talk about that in the upcoming slides, but you want to support the conversation to develop lots of ideas. That's really what the divergent is, like that divergent is going out, create lots of ideas, and then at the right point in the conversation, narrow those ideas back down to get to a decision point and a plan. And it's also your role to see, okay, it feels like we need to take a break now, it feels like we need to carry on working to continue with the progress that we're making. So at different points in the process, you'll want to think, right, okay, how can I move this conversation forward? What tools are needed to support the group to either solve a problem, make a decision? And as a facilitator, your role is to explain to the group how to use that and how to bring about the next stage of the workshop. And throughout, you'll be demonstrating and encouraging the use of interpersonal skills. It is vital that people are communicating clearly and understanding each other's viewpoint, So you've got that role in recognizing how people are interacting with each other, bringing people into the conversation if they've been quiet. And that's not necessarily, and I'd almost recommend not like pinpointing someone and saying, we haven't heard from you, let's get your input, but realizing, okay, perhaps I need to use a different tool to get full participation. So let's tell everyone to write down their ideas for 2 minutes and then to put their post-its up on the wall. So then everyone, even that quieter participant, wrote down their ideas and has had them shared. People don't always necessarily all want to vocalize their ideas the same way across the group participants. So yeah, this last bit here, it's really about that acceptance. If people have been part of the process, then they have got that that buy-in, and therefore more likely that they'll engage in implementation of the plan. So if you tell someone what to do, they won't necessarily feel that it's important to them, but if they've been part of deciding and making the plan, then it's their plan. They've really got that ownership over it. So as a facilitator, quite a lot of your time, you're running activities, but at the same time, you're thinking about when to intervene, when to encourage deeper thinking, or actually when to stand back and actually conversations are flowing and ideas are coming out. And actually the group could potentially go through the point of coming up with ideas to coming up with a plan almost all by themselves. And that's absolutely fine. If you are able to stand back as a facilitator, then that just means that the group are working well together. You don't need to guide if the outcome, which has already been pre-agreed, if you're moving towards it without intervention. But there probably will be points during the process where you will need to have that role to say, right, okay, we're going off a tangent here, we need to bring it back, or okay, we've got stuck on coming up with ideas now because of whatever constraints we have, we need to start bringing those ideas back together to make a plan. So a little bit of input from you guys again. What skills do you think that a good facilitator needs? Any ideas in the chat, or just unmute and join in the conversation?
Sounds like listening skills is one of the top ones.
Yeah, definitely.
Communicating
and not
properly.
just listening to what people say, but also how people say and how people communicate. So actually the very broad version of listening skills, because you'd be looking at people's body language and things like that as well. Good level of empathy, perceptive.
You need a confidence to be able to step in.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there could be a point where the conversations got heated and actually you might just be like, oh, I just want to walk away from this, but it's your role to, as we've had there from someone from Madagascar, remain calm and know the right way to move the conversation forward. Quick critical skills, yeah. So you've really got to be on the ball because you're guiding the process and thinking about the next steps at the same time. Time management, yes, good one. And that's about knowing your plan in advance. So we're coming up to it, but you should have already agreed your outcome and your time frame. So you need to know when to move things forward based on the time that you have. I'd say guide the group rather than lead the group, Manti, because we've got to make sure that the direction is set by their conversation and the outcome that you know that you're working towards, but supporting them. So all of those things are definitely true. I've got a whole range of extra different things on my slides here. So you want to set a productive climate. So you want to make people feel that they're ready to input and they're ready to be involved. Have those like lines, whatever it may be, ready to begin a discussion. So know how to draw out conversation from people. You need to be able to get the group to focus on defining and reaching outcomes. So knowing when the point is to bring people's ideas, to rein them back in. Having lots of ideas and diverging, spreading out is a good thing, but you've got to know when to bring it back in. We've said encouraging for participation, promote mutual understanding, help the group to communicate effectively. And that's not necessarily, as I've said, just in letting people speak. There might be other ways that you need to do that. We've had here from Holly as well, flexibility to be able to judge when discussion is good and needs extending. Yes. So in terms of time management, you've got to be ready for it to go out the window. If you can see that there's a really important conversation that's happening, it's not your role to say, okay, I've got to keep to time, so I'm going to stop that conversation. It's your role to know, right, okay, this is where my flex is, or potentially, right, the point that we're going to get to at the end of this lot of allocated time isn't the end result. So I need to bring this audience back together again, potentially. Fostering self-discovery of alternatives and solutions. So that's really getting those user-generated ideas from the participants, inclusive decisions, actually making decisions rather than being indecisive. Handles disruptive participants effectively. So Anya said that the confidence to be able to step in. So knowing how to handle those difficult participants, whether it's saying, right, now's the time to take a break, change something is generally a good course of action. So break up into group work, take a break, ask that participant for a quiet word on the side. Definitely not drawing attention to it is what I would say. And ideally know enough about the subject to understand where further discussion should be encouraged, but not so much so you're invested in the outcome. So we already said at the beginning, we're probably not in the ideal situation where you're going to be getting an external facilitator in, so you probably are invested in the outcome, but just be really aware of that and make sure you stay in your facilitator box, as it were, to not drive the outcome too much. So some facilitation techniques to manage the process with the group. So things that you will do during the workshop that you're facilitating. So initiate, propose, and make suggestions. So this isn't the same as driving towards the outcome, because you're just putting ideas out there. It's a way of getting the conversation started. Throughout the session, you'll go through different stages of working all together or breaking into subgroups. So knowing the right times for doing that. Using questioning to draw people out, get information and opinions. So you can have participants who, give one-line answers. They're really not getting involved. So it's your role as facilitator to draw people out and get conversations going, but not always. So if people are thinking, it's about recognizing that and allowing time for it. There can be, some people can find it really hard to just let a quiet time happen, but that thinking time is needed. So it's not thinking, right, I need to hear what's being thought about. Sometimes it's fine to just allow that space. You'll also need to keep track of multiple topics, build on the ideas of others. So listening again, or using whatever you're using to capture ideas, not letting an idea pass by. So saying, right, okay, let's dig into that a little bit more and see what others have got to say on that idea, for example. Much easier in person, because the good thing about that is you can capture all of your ideas on post-it notes and flip charts and really see them in the same space. Obviously, like networking and such is easier in person as well. You can do all of this virtually, and there are various different virtual tools for flip charting, but it's just nice when you can look around the room. And I would recommend, if you are doing an in-person one, keeping all of your working up rather than thinking, right, okay, we've done that, let's put it down and out to the side. because people can refer back to it. It guides people's processing to be able to have those notes as reference. So you're also listening out for common themes. You should know enough about the topic and the outcome to have an awareness of when people have gone off on a tangent or they're talking about irrelevant details, because that's wasting the time that you have allocated for the session that you're delivering. So just saying, right, that's interesting, or even, okay, I can see that you're interested in that idea. So you can have another flip chart, which is, things to discuss at a different date, but not now. So keep things on track for what you can cover during the time you have. It may be that you've got speakers coming in to give information relevant to the topic, so organising those. And a useful tool can be actually repeating back what someone said in different words, just to clarify or show your understanding, and then asking for further input from the group. And then having group members relate specific examples, so really getting the real life into the situation. A few things to avoid. So you might have situations where you have got a bit of crossover between the different activities that you're doing, but in general, if you're facilitating a session, you want to avoid acting as the technical expert. This is again about your investment in the outcome. So actually, if you are in the situation where you do know a lot about that subject, particularly our conservation partners, this might well be the case, then I would recommend actually saying, right now, I'm just going to stop being facilitator, and I'm just going to tell you some facts, some information that I know about this species or about this ecosystem, because I know it. So while I'm here, I'll impart that information to you, but then going back into facilitator role and saying, right, now I'm back and just guiding the process, rather than trying to do both at the same time. Avoiding training, because this is about guiding the thought process of the participants rather than passing on knowledge or skills. Driving the agenda. Acting as the scribe, again, you might not have the situation where you've got someone else who can scribe for you, but it's good to actually just get the workshop participants to be writing down their own thoughts and ideas, because then you're not risking putting things into your own words and not truly capturing what it was that they were saying. Imposing your personality on the group. So it's great to have your personality there, but just not imposing it, because that can influence the session. You don't need to own the group's ideas or outcomes. They should be theirs, that they're going to progress and take forwards. Trying to hold back on your own opinions. And making presentations, which is back to that point of technical expert. So we've said that during the workshop that you're facilitating, you're trying to achieve something during that time. So it's really important to know what that is before the workshop starts. So you know where you are now, and you know, which is agreed with whoever is necessary, where you want to be by the end. So what's the objective of that session, of that workshop, or of that series of workshops? Because then you can think, who do you need to involve within that time frame that you have? What process will you take in order to get to that end result? And in some instances, that objective might be set by somebody else. In some instances, that might be set by you. It depends on the situation. But if you're clear on the workshop objective, it helps to inform your planning and everything that follows, including who's invited. And when you're going through that planning process, you need to think, does the group, the workshop participants, will they be able to actually implement the expected outputs? If not, then potentially you need other people in the room so that they can actually own that plan. So if you've got local community groups and everything that they decide needs doing actually needs doing by the local government, then they actually end up having no power over that plan that they came up with. So is there a way that you can bring in the local government to the workshop, or a process by which you can then move that forwards afterwards? Or actually, can you redefine your objective a little bit so that the plan can actually be enabled by the local communities? Does the group have sufficient expertise or knowledge and the right information in order to be able to make the plan that's needed? So we've said there's the three situations: problems to solve, decisions to make, and plans to produce. So how to decide which one of those you're in? So the first question to ask is the cause of the problem known? And here we're particularly thinking about a conservation issue, a species that's at risk, a community that you're trying to engage, or potentially in the zoo setting, you might use this to discuss an audience that you're not currently engaging and questioning why you're not, so that you can make a plan to then engage that audience. So if the cause of the problem isn't known, then if it isn't known, then you can use the problem solving tools. So the next part of the session that we'll be going through is some of those problem solving tools. Next question is the cause of the problem known, but not what we need to do to respond to it? So if that's the case, then you can use decision-making tools to go through, to develop lots of ideas and then decide which ones will be most suitable to address the problem. If you know the problem and you know what you need to do, but not how you need to do it, then actually all that's needed at the end of that is to produce a plan. So next bit is to move into some of those examples of problem solving tools, and then we'll break into groups to try using those problem solving tools. Any questions before we go into the examples of the tools? Or anecdotes?
Hannah, I had a question about group size. Is there like an optimal, like, is it too small a group, things don't happen, too large group, things don't happen? Is it better to have more people or less people?
It really depends on the outcome. So it is 100% dependent on the outcome, because if your outcome, if you decide that all the relevant people to decide and enact the plan that will reach your outcome is 3 people, then more people in the room would just be, you know, sidelined rather than actually really involved. It's about thinking who is needed in order to make that outcome happen. Can they be represented at the workshop? And it's more that you can get to the point where too many people just becomes difficult to manage, but you can do that. And it might just then mean that you don't necessarily, your outcome, if it's a big one, it involves lots of different stakeholders, your process isn't 1 3-hour facilitated workshop. It's first workshops with the different stakeholders separately, so that there's enough of them to have good conversations and get buy-in. And then, as an example, a representative or 2 representatives from each one of those stakeholder groups then joins a cross-stakeholder group that takes the ideas from the pre-planning sessions and brings it all together into one plan, and then takes that forward, for example. So yeah, it just depends on what it is you're trying to achieve. Anything else? Okay, so first example, and these are tools that you can use them all alongside each other. You don't have to think, okay, I'm just using one. So this is where you've got a problem, but you don't know the root cause of the problem. So what you're trying to do is find the root cause of the problem. So for instance, you might have a species which the population is declining, you know the threats to the species, but you need to get to the root cause, and in our situation in terms of education and engagement, the human root cause, because then you can think what you can do about it. Or you might have an audience, so I'm thinking more about a zoo example here, an audience which we're not managing to engage with, but we don't really know why. So tool that you could use here, so 6 honest men. These are really simple things, and this isn't, it feels like really obvious when you go through them, but they do work if you actually think, right, okay, let's use this questioning style. So it's literally just asking a combination of questions to clearly frame the problem, and building up this clear picture and vocalizing it, documenting it, helps you to realize and to think through the different elements that you need to consider. So it's literally what, why, who, where, when, and how. And if you can answer all of those questions, it gives you so much more information about the problem, and then potentially use one of the other tools to dig deeper into you know, even more of the root cause, so that you make sure that you're addressing the right issue when you're making your plan. Because if you start making a plan when you've not got a clear idea of what the problem is, then your plan might not address the problem. So that's why it's really important to have that clear understanding first. Another one, which is one of my favorites, my favorite question ever, is literally to just keep asking why. Because you ask why, someone gives you an answer. Yes, but why does that happen? Or why is it the case that they do this and not that? But why? And generally by the 5th why, you've actually reached the root cause. You might reach it sooner than that, but it uncovers layers, because the first response is generally not the root cause. It's what you can see at surface level. But if you know enough about the issue, then actually just continuing to question and ask why. And it really helps if, as a facilitator, you literally use that prompt and say, okay, I understand what you've said, but why? Right? So that means this or that, but why? And that guides them through that thinking process. Another one, which is the fishbone analysis. So this is more in depth, and those first 2 can very much be used as complementary to these second 2. So you get your first framing, and then you can put it through one of these more in-depth problem solving tools. So you've got your the problem or the outcome, and you're thinking, okay, what are all the different elements that might have gone into making this problem happen? And I think seeing this example makes it clearer. So for instance, you've got someone who's late for work. Okay, what could be all the different causes that make that happen? So related to people, it could be that they've got kids that they were rushing around getting ready for school, they're not motivated by their job, or they're tired from something that's happened beforehand. Looking at methods, okay, maybe their alarm clock didn't work. So there's all these different causes, and then what's useful to do following this is then say, okay, which of these are most relevant, or which of these actually play the biggest part in making someone late for work. You don't have to use these titles that are here, so measurement, material, machine, mother nature, manpower, method. You can put anything there, but those ones can help to let you think of a structure, to think, okay, what could be all the different elements that go into this problem? Because you then do think of the different contributors, because you might only be thinking of, for instance, the people element. So you might only be blaming someone being late for work on the other people in that person's life, but actually there might be a fundamental cause that's coming from a different direction that, unless you consider that full picture, you haven't got in your framing. And finally, in terms of problem solving tool, is the force field analysis. So actually, before I go through these words here, I'll just show you it visually. So you've got your current situation here in the middle. What's driving that to happen and what's stopping that from happening? So they're your driving forces and your resisting forces that are working against each other. So the group will identify things which will improve the situation. So driving, so those are the driving forces. So say you've got a situation where a species of bird, for example, you're looking at their population and trying to protect them. So things which will improve the situation, you could be thinking about improving their habitat, or gosh, mind blank here, didn't have the examples ready, but all the things that could support that population to increase again, reflecting that against things which will worsen or impede the situation. So what are the things that are stopping that from happening? So that might be people unsustainably taking resources from the habitat, it might be trapping or hunting, it might be local cats and dogs, and having a look at what can you do to improve the situation versus what is already in place that is making that situation, is causing that situation to be in that bad position. Also, another thing that can support the process is to look at the magnitude of that force. Is that a big contributing factor or not? Which is something that we mentioned in the fishbone one as well, thinking, okay, which one of those elements is having a big part to play? Some of them, okay, they might be relevant, but really they're not impacting significantly. So it's clarifying what are the significant impactors as well. And using this tool and drawing it up visually for everyone to see, it means the group can visualize which restraining forces to address and which driving forces can be improved. And generally, it's better to focus on eliminating or reducing restraining forces, because unless you get those out of the way, then they're always going to be hindering your progress towards the outcome you're looking for. So just to show you that there again, you've got the things that you can do to improve the situation, the things that are in place that are impeding the situation, and looking at the relevance of those, how much impact are they having? So what we're going to go to in a moment is a little group work activity where we can use situations from your own setting to think, okay, let's imagine a problem and go through this process a little bit. Before we do, any questions on those tools?
Can I ask a question, Anna, please?
Yes.
I don't know if it's relevant, or maybe if you could give us, you know, we are having some issues with how to get people interested, like to come to our site visits. You know, we do the workshops and then it follows with site visits, but we can see that people are not interested. I mean, maybe if you could suggest or if you could pinpoint some driving forces to motivate these people, because it forms part of the training that we are offering. But then, you know, we are not, it's not that we are not able, but we cannot get them to come.
So that could be, so when we go into this session, I'd welcome you to use that as an example and get some input from whoever's in your group. But as we mentioned there, if possible, prioritize addressing the restraining forces rather than adding to the driving forces, because unless you get rid of, there might be a significant resisting force. So for instance, it might just be, you know, that they can't take the time away from their work in order to attend. So then maybe it's about compensation so that the work lost isn't such an issue for them. or it might be that they can't get childcare. So there's no amount of driving force that can address that. But what you could do is run children's activities alongside your workshop so that the family can come together. So that would be a really nice example to look through as we go into groups now. Does anyone else have any other examples they think would be interesting to discuss, and we can just sort of bring it into the conversation all together first before we go into groups? Because when we go into groups, we do want that someone from each group has got an example. So hopefully there are a few out there. Okay, so I'll just go through the group work session and then figure out how we break into groups, because in some places there's multiple people in a room and in some places there isn't. So what we're going to do, so as a group, we'll focus on one of your projects and an activity that the discussion can focus on. So it might be a species you're working to achieve, an audience you're struggling to engage. So a really nice example there was not being able to actually get participants to come to a session. So you can use the tools to think, okay, what is the root cause behind this? So your group will pick a facilitator, so someone who wants the great opportunity to practice some of these tools. You might end up that actually you end up doing it a bit more collaboratively, the facilitation, just because you've all just been through this process and one of you wants to suggest, okay, let's try this tool next. But try picking one person so they can practice the role of facilitator. And everyone else is pretending to be workshop participants, pretending they're the right relevant person to be in that workshop, because we know that you need to have relevant knowledge and expertise to be part of the session. So even if you're pretending, it's about practicing the process rather than actually we're trying to get to the end result at this time. So start by having a brainstorm about the range of threats, the reason that the audience doesn't engage, whatever it may be, and then select a threat or a key reason that you want to find the root cause for. And use one or more of those problem solving tools so that you can understand the root cause of a problem. So to summarize that, it's deciding a specific problem and using problem solving tools to try to get to the root cause of that problem. So I'd suggest whoever's idea you address, they're not the facilitator. So you want one person who's facilitator, one person who says, okay, I've got an idea that it would be interesting. I'll give you the context and you can all be the participants in the scenario. So the facilitator should encourage the group to listen to each other, ask clarifying questions, so that people understand each other and challenge the ideas being presented. And as I said, with the pretending, like, I totally understand that we're not in the situation where you've all got the right knowledge and expertise, but it's about testing out these ideas, really. So I'm going to stop sharing. And actually, I might. Okay, welcome back to everyone. So thank you for that. First of all, I definitely recognize that it's not very much time. It is just a little snapshot just to test putting it into reality. And I also appreciate that who you were in a group with, you know, a whole premise of deciding who's going to be in your workshop is, do they have the right knowledge and information? And I'm sure in each of the rooms there was basically one person who the activity was focused around, so it was hard to make that group activity. But I'd just be interested to hear a little bit of feedback from facilitators and participants, how they found the tools in terms of did it get conversations going? Were they able to draw out conversations and information, and just any feedback, really?
I can provide a little bit if that would be helpful. So we were working around Manti's problem of people attending a workshop but not going on a site visit. I think the process really enabled us to ask questions of Manti and to pull out from her answers some of the driving forces and the resisting forces that would then be a jumping off point for further discussions. I think with that, I don't know if anyone else from our group would like to add anything.
Thank you for that, Anya. And as you say, that good quality framing rather than just saying, okay, people aren't turning up to workshops, let's come up with ideas to solve it. Having that framing first, as you said, sets the starting point for you to be in the right place for the next stage, which is coming up with ideas. Feedback from any other room? Alex?
I think the first challenge for us was trying to kind of create understanding between the group. So we worked with Benny over in Mauritius and two specific groups, I think, really, that he's trying to work with, but we worked on kind of defining things. So fishermen, we understood, but he was using the word skipper. So trying to define what exactly a skipper was and sort of what their role was before we hit the underlying problem. So there was a lot of questioning, trying to get understanding. We had a bit of back and forth of coming up with ideas. But we were kind of getting down to the fact that there's issues with the relationship of the law, as well as the relationship of that law with both the skipper and the fisherman role. So we didn't really get far at solving any issues as coming from two different countries and two different roles. It was a lot of just trying to create that understanding within the group before we could solve issues.
Yeah, and yeah, it's called the problem solving section, but really I'd say it's almost the problem defining section, because you're defining what is the root cause. To solve the problem, you've got to come up with the ideas, refine the ideas and make the plan, and that's all the next process. So actually spending the time to figure out what is the problem, I think you did well. Anything from Nayara, your group?
Just in contrast to what Alex just said, we found a common problem across the various organizations, which was we looked at engaging young people, so ages between 12 and 25. So that was sort of a theme that we were all encountering. So it was quite easy to get the ball rolling on that. One thing I would say that I found hard to not come up with solutions when we were talking about the problems. So we try and stick to what is the problems. So I don't know if that's, you could give any guidance on that, or like, is that okay to happen? Should you sort of try and bring it back to what the problem is?
I'd say that you should be aware that it's happening. So it's really good that you recognize that it was. And you should be conscious to not let yourself run away with it, because if you've not finished the proper framing of the problem, but don't dismiss it. Like, a best idea might just fleet into your head. So great idea to even have a space that can capture that. So it's right. Great idea, captured. We can reference that and come back to it. Write down what's needed to remember, because sometimes you might just put down one word because you think, I'll definitely remember that idea later. And then an hour later, when you get to that part of the process, you have no idea what it was referring to. So capture it, but don't follow it down the rabbit hole yet.
Because we had a similar problem, I think we got to the problem root cause quite quickly, didn't we? We kind of realized it was about incentive and sort of motivating that age group. So we kind of flowed quite quickly onto what kind of things we could do.
Okay, great. Anything from the Madagascar contingency?
Yeah, for us it was about conservation, about Faria Regatta. We discussed about how if the audience is not engaged in the causes, how can we help them to be there? And we've put some, we we used 5 whys. Why? At the end, 5 why is not enough. We need more than 5 because Malagasy people is very talkative, and but at the end we know that the best solution in our ways is to find another source of income for them. And for the brainstorming, we saved it a little bit. We didn't have more. We are in the same group as Madagascar Vocals, and we talk a lot about this. And we think we zap brainstorming because of the fact that we are aware of the situations. It was about us.
Yeah. Yeah, ask as many whys as you need. If you've not got to the root cause, just keep asking why, that's fine. And we're definitely getting this common theme across that you might know something that you want to address, you might know the audience that you want to be part, like, you know, you've decided the outcome of your workshop you want to facilitate, so therefore you know the audience that you need to get there, and actually the first problem is getting them there. So yeah, that's something that you as an organization can first do some problem solving and make an action plan in order to even get the participants to the main workshop. So you can use the same tools. You'd just be using them internally as a project team to get yourself to that activity that you want to run. Lovely, thank you very much. So I'm going to just respect that people might just need a quick break, stretch legs, comfort break. So we will start back again at past. It's going to be 10:30 for the UK, but whatever time zone you're in. And what we're going to come up to next is just looking at something that might come up that makes conversations hard to progress. We'll quickly look at that, and then going into some of the decision-making tools. So when you've decided what your problem is, you'll come up with lots of ideas, how and when to refine those ideas so that you can make a plan. So we'll meet back here in 5 minutes. Okay, so the next thing that it's important to reflect on, because it often comes out in the language and doesn't help the process, is comparing position versus needs. So I will explain what that means now. So position statements often focus on what the other has to do and provide a single solution to a perceived problem. So for example, the fishermen are taking too many fish from the water. They have to stop using those nets that they're using. They have to do this, they have to do that. So saying what someone else's problem is and what they can do about it. Or the cattle grazers are letting their cattle go over this protected habitat. This is what they have to do. These position statements may create conflict where there might be no need, because what you're doing is you're saying someone else is a problem and you're trying to say what they should do. What can help the situation, describe the same thing and support the parties present in the room to come to a solution, is to actually make sure that you're understanding the underlying cause. And we can do this by getting through to a need statement instead, because these are harder to dispute and easier for people to accept. So in those situations that I talked through, instead the marine conservationists could say, I need that the unsustainable fishing is stopped, or I need that the motorboats don't use this channel because it disrupts the delicate fauna at the bottom of the water. In the cattle farmers example, I need that this habitat, that this grassland is allowed to grow for at least X amount of time, or I need that. So you're stating a clear statement about what's needed in terms of solving the problem, rather than the other audience and what they're potentially, in your opinion, doing wrong. And as a facilitator, if you notice these position statements, by asking why, we can encourage stakeholders to express their underlying needs and concerns and to build that shared understanding of the situation. So if somebody says they are doing this and they should be doing that, then it's just the simple question, why? So why do you need that? Why is that a problem? Why is that solution important? And by doing that, they've instead moved and vocalized what actually they need in terms of addressing that situation. So I thought it could be interesting to hear some examples of position statements that might be relevant for your settings, and see if we can think, okay, instead of turning it into a position statement, what would the, like, how do you recognize it as a position statement? And can we try some examples to go about finding the underlying cause? So is there any examples that anyone can offer, potentially from our field partners, where you've got audiences that, if you look at it one way, might be causing an issue for a conservation project? So you could say a position statement regarding it, but we could find the underlying cause. We could also think of examples for our wider UK audiences, all sorts of environmental problems that we're trying to address.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to use an example from Lithuania, where in Lithuania we have a nature reserve park that is on our peninsula, where we have a park that's just about our dunes and about UNESCO protected dunes. A lot of people want to go there, but you do have to pay a tax to enter the area because it conserves, it works towards conservation in the area and like wildlife and especially bird life. But there is a conflict of like, what do we need to do to maintain this? But how do we keep essentially this national pride in this like amazing place in our country? So yeah, it was a little bit difficult to balance out, like, if are they increasing prices for entry, or are they doing like different prices for different times of year when there's more people, or do some people get passes, or just some people like who are living nearby who might have needed to work in the area would have one opinion, but tourist people from the completely different end of the country might just be a little bit miffed and want to enter the area anyway, not understand why we have those restrictions in place.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, potentially the position statement might be they, so that would be whoever facilitates and manages that space, is putting taxes that means that we can't go to that area, and it makes it inaccessible. Whereas actually, if you turn that around, look at the underlying cause, you can see it from both points of view. So from the person who wants to visit, they say, I want that space to be accessible. I can't afford this, or I need to be able to do that. And from the organization's point of view, we need to be able to create revenue to support the protection of the habitat, whatever it may be. And then you can look at those two different need statements. Okay, you need to create revenue, you need that space to be accessible, and at the moment it isn't. And then that is a situation that you can work with. You can think, okay, how do we support audiences that might be financially not able to visit, and that might be a supported scheme for particular audiences, or as Sam even suggested, you know, potentially different times of the year have got different pricing ranges, so that you could make the space accessible by making it cheaper at certain times of the year. Thank you. Any other examples? So if anyone wants to example moving me from position to needs. So I'm in a workshop which is let me think of my example. So looking at some of the projects that we support over in Southeast Asia, we've got a lot of risk to bird populations because of trapping. So you could definitely have the situation where workshop participants might speak about them in terms of the people who are trapping the birds. So, you know, saying they are trapping these birds indiscriminately and they need to stop. So if anyone who wants to practice being a facilitator heard that in the session, how would you go about finding the underlying cause? Can you example with me finding out what actually is the issue that we need to address? Who's going to pop their hand up and jump in? Sam, go for it.
So the first thing to ask is why they are trapping the birds.
You could, but I would ask actually why, because that's about their motivation, and if they're not there, well, they might be there, but you wouldn't necessarily know their motivation. So more, why is that issue relevant in the conservation setting? And so the answer from me might be, it is unsustainable. Too many birds are being taken from the wild. So actually now this population is at risk. Because then actually I've redefined it as the need is that we need to be able to protect a sustainable wild population. And the way that the birds are being taken at the moment means that that population is at risk. Nayara, did you want to add anything? Did I answer it? Okay, I won't spend any more time on that. We were potentially going to go into little groups, but I want to be able to get through these decision-making tools as well. So we're going to carry on through. So similar with the problem solving, there are different tools that you can use to help you go through your decision-making process. But just to give a bit of context of this section of the workshop first. So the first section was really framing your problem, which, as we've clarified, is really important so that you don't jump into making decisions about something that might not actually really be the root cause. It might be surface level that looks like that's the problem, but unless you've really carefully looked, there might actually be an underlying problem. And if you don't try even bring it up in conversation, you definitely won't address it. And so therefore, the plan that you put in place won't actually achieve what you want it to. So you've clearly defined your problem, the root causes, and you've selected, okay, we're going to address that root cause. So now you're at the point where you need to figure out how. So this is the process that you'll go through using the different tools. So you'll write down your decision statement. So that's your goal that you want to achieve. So you want to, for instance, have a sustainable population of the wild birds. You want to have a community that is sustainably managing the natural resources of the forest they live alongside. You want to, whatever it may be, state it, make sure it's a positive goal that you're trying to achieve. So you're not saying in your goal that you want to stop this or reduce that. You're saying the flip side of that, you want to sustain this or achieve that. It's just a mindset thing. It will help to move things forward. And then you'll go through a process where you want to generate alternatives to achieving that goal. And at that point, every idea is a good idea. You want to get input from everyone and not try to say, right, okay, we need to make a decision. First step is coming up with all of the ideas, looking at the alternatives, comparing, getting feedback from different participants on other people's ideas, assessing the potential drawbacks. So what would be the positive for this idea, but what potentially might either make it difficult to deliver or not get the result that you're quite interested in, and then going through a process to make the final choice. Might be one idea, might be a collection of ideas. It really depends on what it is that suits the goal that you're trying to achieve. So the first stage, when you're coming up with all of those ideas, that's your divergent thinking stage. So you can see there in the little diagram, all the ideas are going out. So you're really getting lots of ideas, and you could potentially end up going slightly off tangent, but that's just because you're in a creative stage, and it's good where you don't want irrelevant ideas, you do want creative ideas. So you don't want to put people into too narrow an avenue for what they're creating at this stage. So this might, at this point, lead to differences of opinion of the right course of action, because someone might think, no, this is really the way to make this happen, which could be quite different to someone else's idea. And you might think, right, okay, there's too much, people aren't agreeing here, I need to bring these ideas back together. Not necessarily. There might be a stage during the process of decision making where it gets a bit difficult because you have got these different ideas, but that doesn't mean that you want to close down the conversation too early. So it's about recognizing, and it's something that you just really learn with practice, when's the right time to draw the ideas together, and when's the right time to say, I think we're still thinking, I think there's more that we could come up with. So it's one of your roles as facilitator to support the group to know when to make that change, to go from divergent thinking to convergent thinking. And it might be that they themselves come up with 3 ideas and then say, right, okay, let's make a plan. So actually, it might be your job to keep them in the divergent thinking, to say, okay, they're good ideas, but have we covered everything? Have we really addressed what we need to here? Again, just something that with practice, you develop sort of an insight into what works in different situations. So as I said, you might get that bit where people have got opposing ideas, they don't feel like they're getting closer to a plan and to a solution. And this is actually a stage in facilitation that's often referred to as the groan zone, where people, like I said, they don't feel like they're achieving what they want to. And it's just about supporting the group through this process, and actually even, you know, vocalizing it, saying it's fine, saying, you know, this is what we're going to do next, and then we're going to refine the ideas, helping people see what point they're at in the process. So interpersonal skills are really important in this part of the process, helping the members to express their frustrations, making sure that they're so the group members might be expressing their frustrations or having side conversations, disengaging from the process. So just using your facilitation skills to keep people together, to keep people on track. And as we said as well, an important part of the process is knowing the right point to take a break and say, right, we'll take a break now, and when we come back, this is what we'll move on to, so that people can get their mindset right for moving on, because you can't necessarily get the right collaborative work if people aren't in the right mindset. So you can look at this slide afterwards. I'm certainly not going to read through it, but just to let you know, there will be people, not necessarily in your workshop, depends on who it ends up that you invite, but some people love coming up with all of the ideas. They're the creative people, they've got that strong imagination, and that's what they like to do. They like to create ideas. Some people like to come up with plans and to define things down. So some people like the converging process. Other people are more of that assimilator role. So they want things to be logical. They want to be a clear plan. And other people are more of an accommodator. So they like to actually get things done and just get to the end result. So it's just something to be aware of, that there might be some people in your group that don't like different parts of the process, and you can just play on the skills that you have in the room for the different points as you go. So some examples that you can use. So winnowing and clustering. So when you come up with lots of ideas, it's good if that is very visually captured in some way. So if you're physically there in person, I would recommend every single idea goes on a separate post-it note. Those post-it notes can then be put up on flip charts or up on the wall. If you are doing it virtually, you can use exactly the same in one of the online platforms that enables you to do that. I would recommend every separate idea being on a separate post-it note. That really helps with this, which I'll talk through here now, rather than each person, writing down 3 points on one post-it. Once you've got this big long list of ideas, then you can start reviewing them. So these two things are a bit of a review process. So winnowing, and both of these things you should do with the group to get their participation and their input and for clarifying. So you as a facilitator, imagine I've got a wall of flip charts, post-it notes behind me. I can, sort of look at one and say, okay, here it says that you want to do ABC. This post-it also says the same thing in different words. Do you agree that that's captured there? And clarifying, because that person might say, no, I can see that they're similar, but actually I meant something different by that. I actually meant this. So not taking ownership of their ideas and saying, right, you've already said that I'm only going to pick out these ideas. That's not what winnowing is. It's with the group clarifying, right, let's make this mess of ideas clear so that we can see the priorities that are coming through. Another example, which is very similar and I prefer as the starting point, so rather than taking anything down in the first instance, is clustering. So actually just saying, right, okay, let's get together all of the ideas that are about working with this audience, all the ideas that are about addressing this issue. So really grouping together the ideas. And if you keep all of the post-its up there, it lets you see if actually something was mentioned by 6 different people in the room, whereas something was just mentioned by 1 person in the room, then that can give you a sense that there's a greater input into one idea or another. So once you've done that and you've got you've clarified your groups of ideas, or in some way you've removed superfluous information. So that might be either by sort of literally putting ideas together on top of each other, or actually saying, right, that's represented in this one, so we don't need 10 things that all say the same. So then you want to go through a process of reviewing the ideas and actually deciding collaboratively which ones are best to take forward to address the problem that you referred to. So that's always really important to make sure that the group refer back to. So wait, let's just check in. What problem are we trying to address here? Not just what's the best idea, or all of a sudden what would get the most press coverage or whatever. No, what will address the problem, because that's what we're trying to achieve. So one example, you might have come up with 6 ideas that could all be used to address the same problem. So you could go through a process of looking at, okay, what's the pros, cons, and fixes for these different ideas? So you literally on your board write up 3 columns. So what are the advantages or strengths of this alternative? So what's the selling points? What are the disadvantages or risks with this alternative? So what might hinder the process if you took that route? And then fixes is what could we do to fix or overcome the disadvantages or whatever's detailed under the cons? And you might actually be able to remove that con very simply just by changing something, or it might be, okay, there's nothing I can do about that con, and actually it's quite significant, and that can help you to realize that that's potentially not the right idea to move forward. Or it can help them to realize that, should I say. Another idea, and you can do both together, it's really up to you. They both have, you can use them separately or you can use them together, is looking at prioritization of ideas. So it's important before doing prioritization to decide your criteria for prioritization. So you might say, right, okay, we now need to decide which of these ideas is most important. So go and vote on these ideas in some way. But if people go in with a different mindset, so one person is voting on which idea costs the least, whereas one person is voting on which idea engages the biggest audience, then the way that they've prioritized is completely different. So it's not really comparable. So important as a group to decide what will be the decision making, what makes an idea worth prioritizing. So when you actually do the prioritization, one tool, super simple, works well. You can also do it with sticky dots, is 3 ticks. So each person within the group can put 3 ticks next to one or more of the ideas on the list. So again, say I've got 6 ideas up on the wall behind me. You can put all 3 on one idea if you're like, I think that this 100%, I give it all my vote, or you can put 3 separate ticks on 3 separate things. Those are your ticks to spend how you want to. You can make it an anonymous process if you want to. It really depends on who is there in the workshop that you are delivering. But then important to reflect back and say, okay, this is what we've got. Let's talk about it. Does this reflect right what actually you think is prioritization? You don't need to necessarily just say, right, that one's got the most ticks, let's move it forwards. Always make sure that there's that checking back process with the audience as well. Yeah, so I mentioned you can put all your ticks on one idea if you want to. So then you literally add up the number of ticks for each idea, the ones with the most being priority ideas as identified with the group, but just truth check that and make sure, okay, do we agree? Does that fit with the criteria that we set as a group? So I thought once again, it would be interesting to try out some of these examples. So what did we say? We said winnowing, clustering, or even just talk through them. Potentially we've not got time to actually, brainstorm ideas and put them on Post-its, particularly because it's more difficult virtually. But we said winnowing, clustering, pros, cons, fixes, and then prioritization and being clear how your prioritization is working. So I've suggested to keep the conversation going using the same idea that you were referring to in your problem stage. So thinking of some ideas that could help to address that, winnowing and clustering the ideas, trying to group them together, prioritizing the ideas and making sure you're setting the criteria for that, and deciding which of those tools you'd use in that situation, or just use them as a discussion point. So I'm going to send you back into the same rooms, and I'll leave it to the rooms to decide if someone else steps in and tries the facilitator role. If you want to talk about a different topic, fine, but to keep you able to get the conversation going, I'd suggest sticking with the same one. And I'm going to suggest that we come back together at 10 past. Sorry, I'm just going to stop recording. So again, thank you for your conversations in those discussion rooms. It'd help if I wasn't mute. Thank you for your contribution in those discussion rooms. Apologies, I forgot to share before you went into them. And I saw that in some of the rooms, it was a little bit difficult because you were just having those conversations. You're not in that physical room, so you're not doing the post-its and putting them on the walls. But one way that you can do that virtually, and I'll just show you an example of one platform. So this is Jamboard, it's Google and it's completely free. You can literally, they are post-its, you can create post-it notes, write down all your ideas, and if someone in the virtual room has got this actually screen shared, then it's live and it's visual, and it's the equivalent of looking at the post-it notes going up on the wall. So that can really help, because as we said, the flip charts help participants to keep track of the conversation and where the ideas are going and where the ideas are flowing, and actually being able to see this being shared on the screen can be really useful. And to just give you an example of the winnowing and the clustering, this might be one group of ideas and you can physically then move them around. Or actually these ideas, it just so happens they're both blue. These ideas, they fit in the same group. Right, now we can see we've got these three themes. Let's move it forward to that either prioritization or pros, cons, fixes, whatever we do next with those ideas. So there are various virtual platforms. So if any of you are facilitating virtual workshops and you do want a discussion about what works in different situations, I'd be more than happy to have that conversation and talk through ideas. Any of the rooms wanting to give a little bit of feedback, either about where they got to? Again, respecting that, you know, you definitely might not have got through the process. 10 minutes is not how long you give to a brainstorming and decision-making process. Alex?
Yeah, I wish I could say we solved all of Benny's issues, but we didn't get that far. But I think we did make a lot of progress. We did throw some ideas down that I think were quite good ideas and covered quite a broad sort of spectrum of I guess solutions and options. And then right before we finished, which I was thinking it would be really nice to have a Jamboard for my I keep calling her Maya because my brother's girlfriend, I've been talking to her. Mia is, she came up with a good idea about putting them into specific categories to figuring out things like alternatives, which ones are facilitating the issues that were in mind, and whatever the last one was. So no, alternatives, what was it, Mia? Alternatives, facilitation, and
it was facilitating, preventing, and alternatives. So it was just about getting all the ideas that we had down and just putting them into one of those groups. So on a Jamboard, it would be really good to visualize.
Yeah, so it's quite good. We got to there and then time ran out.
Thank you. Anything from another group? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, in my group also, you know, many of the members came with alternatives, and one of the alternatives that somebody said, you know, virtual site visit, which generated the idea that, you know, we could arrange for a trip and do the workshop instead of doing it in the closed room. We do it on the ship, on the boat, and just followed by the site visit and done. I mean, 2 in 1 on the same day, without getting the people to come twice for 2 different purposes, and 1 workshop, 1 site visit. So we would merge the workshop and the site visit on the same day, but then get the maximum participation and give them, instead of giving you know, food on 2 occasions, paying the hotel and the boat trip. So we would merge everything, and maybe it could be cost effective in one way or the other. So that was a brilliant idea, which we're going to look into. And I thank all members for that.
You're very welcome. And one thing we reflected on this conversation as well is to be clear what is the problem you're trying to solve, because the problem isn't necessarily people not coming to the site visit, because you've got to question, why do you want people to come on the site visit? And if the why you want people to come on the site visit is, for example, not saying it is, connection to nature and people then looking after the environment, that doesn't have to be achieved by a site visit. So making sure you're clear why you need something to happen, because that will help you figure out the right solution.
Thank you.
Anything else from another group? Nara, Martin, or Michael?
Yeah, I think in our group, we were already discussing about a solution in the previous section. And so, yeah, it would have been good to be able to, because we were a small group, so we had ideas that we were each one giving, to be able to have it visually would have been good, because right now we had to remember what we discussed previously and try to, okay, what to add to it. But while discussing was more like a conversation, because it's a small activity, very short, we kind of like came to a sort of like agreement on what would work best. And then afterwards we came to the point like, well, you know, there's maybe these two things that might be relevant, but then we have to dig deeper, because it might not be relevant for the context. There might not be capacity, there might not be enough funding. So yeah, it'd be good to do that. But then how would this work out? And so we were starting to discuss this aspect, and then we had to break out, because yeah, you can have some really good ideas, but when you started digging deeper to see whether it's pragmatic or not and applicable, then you might think, yeah, great idea, but it's not going to work out in this context or for this budget year or something like that.
Yeah. So you've got to see what are your constraining factors that will make this idea feasible or not. And yeah, as you go on to facilitate, you might find that your workshop participants, they just work together great and they just come up with loads of ideas, and therefore your job as facilitator is just to find out those realities and to bring the ideas back together. Or what we've not had today is you might have the situation where someone thinks this is the way this needs to be solved, someone thinks this is the way this needs to be solved, and those two things can't happen together or aren't in line with each other. So then that's a very different way of supporting the group to move along. So I've just got a couple more slides to share, and then open to any questions, or if people want to discuss a little bit more one of their examples to get ideas from this collective group while we're together. So I'll just show you the last few slides. So just a couple of hints and tips for recording. As we've reflected on, it is really important to record the conversation. So apologies, we didn't do that, although we had very little time in that last activity. But whether you're virtually or in person, so don't think, oh, it's virtual, like, so, you know, we can't do it the same. There are virtual tools, so you can. It's not the same as in person, but it can be as productive. And the quality of the decision that's made, the problem that's solved, or the plan that's developed will depend on the quality of information that's generated and the level of acceptance in the group. So recording that information and making that information visible is a great way to make sure that the participants have that buy-in. You've always got the opportunity of someone saying, oh, you didn't quite capture what I meant by what you've written there, or I noticed someone in that other group had this idea, I'm not sure I agree. You provide the information visually so people have got the opportunity to process it, to digest it, but also as and when they feel comfortable, or you facilitate them to be able to challenge it and to find either ways to make an idea develop and better, or ways to say, in my opinion, there's these cons with the idea that we need to address. So ideas for doing this that can help to track the idea, the content that you're developing over the session. You could number the pages, or if you're putting them up on the walls, sort of show them in sequence so people can really see the flow of thinking. leave space so that ideas that are relevant to something that was previous can be added in there if suitable. Have different coloured post-its, have different coloured markers. It helps people to express themselves, even if they're not necessarily, defining one colour for like one thing. It's just to have engaging visualization there. Making sure you're always checking the understanding. So I did hear this from the facilitators as I popped into the room, like repeating back, like if I write it like this, does that capture what you're saying? And asking further questions to clarify before necessarily noting it down. Drawing linkages, so saying, yeah, you're saying this, that relates back to what so-and-so said earlier. And making sure that everyone can see the information that's being presented. So you could also have a situation where you've got a hybrid workshop that you're going to facilitate in this new world that we live in now, which would definitely be more challenging. I would say it's not something that I've done yet, because if you've got post-its around the room, obviously that can't be represented clearly to the participants joining virtually. So actually you might be better off doing it all on a big screen that can be shared then with the virtual audience. So do consider everyone who's participating, however they might be participating. If you're thinking in terms of flip chart, you can have those flip chart stands where the pages can just go over onto the back. It's recommended, don't just turn it over, because then it's not visible anymore. So take that page off, put it up on display somewhere. So think about that when you're planning the room setting that you're going to work in. Are you even allowed to put things up on the walls, or where else might you display that information for reference? And don't squish in your writing, write too small or write selectively. So don't dismiss anything as facilitator, capture it, and then it's for the group to review. So what we've not really covered yet is the third part of the session, and we're not going to go into in detail, just some hints and tips quickly here. So you've refined your problem, you've created your ideas, narrowed them down and figured out which are the best ones. So the next step is really to make a plan to make that happen. It really does depend on the content of the idea that you've created, and the plan should be created by the workshop participants. So you're guiding the process, not driving the process. So you want to support the participants to make sure that they clearly document the objective that they want to achieve. So in their plan should be a written plan. In my opinion, it will then be a reference point for them to go back to. So the first thing that should be stated is, right, through this plan, what are we trying to achieve? What's the audience that we'll work with to achieve that? Then document there the agreed activities, making sure you've got enough details in there to make the plan useful, and that depends on what the plan is. So important things to include in a plan is making sure you've got set timeframes or deadlines, and making sure that you've assigned responsibilities. So making sure that it's clear who's doing what and by when. It might be who's leading on it, but it might also be who's going to be involved to make that happen. And ideally, whoever is being assigned responsibility are people that are in the room, so that they've got buy-in into that plan, that ownership, as Martin said. Set targets and make sure that they're both realistic but also ambitious. We want to achieve as much as we possibly can with these plans. And then decide how you will measure success. So this is the target that you set. How will you know if you manage to get there or not? Martine.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment with regards to the steps like you do within a workshop, like what you've just described. It will be in an ideal world to be able to decide, create a plan, assign who's going to do this. But in reality, sometimes it's very different. So we realize time is a big constraint for us. We get these stakeholders for 2 hours or 3 hours max. And sometimes the process you're going through, we cannot go through all of it with them. So we kind of like start with the brainstorming, generating ideas, and make them present to the group. And then there are some line of thoughts that's coming out. And us as facilitators, when we're wrapping up, would say, okay, we've seen like, everybody seems to be agreeable that we need more signboards in the islets, for instance, to be able to inform visitors. And then the rest of the work in terms of like looking at each and doing the pros and cons, what idea is kind of like really could be potentially feasible, we do it afterwards because we don't have the time to really do the whole process with them. It requires a day, a full day, and we don't usually get a full day with them. We get like 2 hours or 3 hours. So I don't know if it's a good thing, but it's like starting up the process and actually get them to talk and get them to discuss with each other and sing. But ultimately, we kind of like go for the more deeper process on our side due to time constraint.
I mean, you have to deal with the reality of what you have. And I think it's just important to recognize what's the priority part of the process that the audience is involved in. From that example that you mentioned, it sounded like the ideas that came from the decision-making process were things that Mauritian Wildlife Foundation would put into place or would action. So therefore, I'd say it's absolutely right and fine that you then go through that decision-making process and put that plan in place, because you basically have been assigned the action. But you might have a session where the ideas that come out, it needs the community participants or the local government participants or the whatever it may be participants to make changes and put things into place. And if that's the case, then you need to find a way for them to continue to be involved. Because if they just come up with an idea, you know, say for instance, it's about, is Michael's on the call? Yeah, it's about sustainable grazing over the grassland area in terms of going into the national park or the perimeter of the national park as well. So actually they need to change their grazing processes. So it actually then needs to be them to figure out, okay, how do we practically do this, rather than someone going away, coming up with a plan and then trying to tell them what to do. So if you know that the idea will be for you to enact, then that's fine to.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, because we do have like stakeholder meetings when we have representatives from the different groups together with local authorities to discuss what have come out of these workshops.
Yeah.
So it's a follow-up, but basically not with all the participants that we have. Maybe 1 or 2 representatives from like the fisherman community, from the skippers community, and then from all the local authorities. And we say, okay, these are the recommendations, the ideas that have come forward. And then we discuss in a bigger group with them. And so this is like a continuity, but often, time, it's very difficult to get people together and also having the time. So sometimes we have to kind of like compromise and try to see what we can do in the time.
But what you're doing is, so going back to one of those first slides where it said the starting point, the outcome and the process, you've decided the process that will get you to your outcome. The process doesn't have to be a workshop, one workshop for as many hours as is needed. Your process is the problem solving and brainstorming with the communities, depth work by Mauritian Wildlife Foundation, review process with the relevant stakeholders, putting the plan in section. That's your process. And if that process gets you the outcome, then it's a good process. Any other questions or things people want to add from their experience? Okay, so just to mention before we close, referring to the next training that we've got coming up. So in May, on 19th of May, we've got a session which is going to be run by our exhibitions and interpretation team, which is about writing interpretation and design work. If people have got specific requests for, you know, this is where we're looking to get more information or more ideas, then please do let us know so we can make that content work best. And also just to flag that in June, the session that's coming up is focusing on safeguarding. And it is going to be a requirement from Chester Zoo that we know more about your safeguarding policies and processes. So that training is really to support you to make sure that you've got in place what is needed. So I'll be in touch with some organisations in the coming weeks to just ask what you've already got in place so we can see what support is needed to make sure that good quality safeguarding processes are in place. So we shall leave it there. Thank you all very much for your time today, for your contributions, and looking forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank